I'm EAC Commissioner Ben Hovland. Each year, the EAC holds the National Clearinghouse Awards, also known as the Clery Awards, to recognize best practices in election administration. This year, the EAC commissioners are interviewing some of the 2020 Clery winners to dive deeper into these best practices and get a better understanding of the technology, initiatives, and hard work that won Clery Awards. Today, I'm pleased to speak with Dean Logan, Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk for the Los Angeles County, California, and Megan Wolf, Administrator for the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Both the LA County Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk's Office and the Wisconsin Elections Commission won a 2020 Clery for improving accessibility for voters with disabilities. LA County won for their Flex Vote Center program, and Wisconsin won for their Accessibility Advisory Committee. Congratulations to Mr. Logan and Ms. Wolf, and thank you both for speaking with me today. To just kick things off, we'll start with Dean. If you could just give us a little overview of the program and tell us about the Flex Vote Center program and how it worked.
Great, thank you, Commissioner, and thanks so much for the Clery program. It's such a great opportunity to recognize programs across the nation, and more importantly, to be able to share those programs across the nation, so we can all pick up on the benefits and spread those around. We're very excited and really pleased to be recognized for our Flex Vote Center program in Los Angeles County. This was part of our overall Voting Solutions for All People initiative that was a decade-long project for kind of reimagining the voting experience in Los Angeles County. But this particular program is one that is just really special and meaningful for us, because it really aligned with our philosophy of meeting voters where they were at and being able to adapt to conditions. And little did we know how much we would have to adapt to conditions in 2020 with the pandemic, and this program really helped us with that. So the Flex program, kind of as an overview, is a program where we have the ability to go out into the community and take a mini vote center. So in LA and in California, a vote center is essentially, it's a polling place, but it's a polling place that's open to all registered voters in the county. So we have a 10-day early voting period, and the Flex program allows us to go into the community to serve particular populations, and it's really focused on hard to reach populations. So in 2020, we focused on voters experiencing homelessness, voters in assisted living facilities, voters with disabilities who were going to facilities during the day to get other services, but we would take voting out there for them to be able to access at that same time. And then also to geographically isolated areas of our county. I know people don't think about that in terms of Los Angeles County, but we have some very rural areas in the northern part of our county that it's just hard to find a location or a facility that can serve as a vote center. So we take these, we schedule our Flex teams to go out into the community to these places and allow voters to come in and vote. And it has the full range of accessible voting equipment, voter information, and it's just an exciting way to be out in the community and make sure we reach everybody.
That's great. I think actually one of my last trips before the pandemic was to LA County for the presidential primary, and I think I was at one of those, and it's literally meeting the voters where they are. So. Yeah, that's great. Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about Wisconsin and the Accessibility Advisory Committee?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you so much for having me here today, Commissioner, and congrats to Dean on your program. I agree. One of the most important parts about this program is getting to hear about all of the other fantastic things that are happening around the country in improving election administration. So we really appreciate the award, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to learn from some of the other jurisdictions about other things that we can consider for the future. In Wisconsin, we organize and administer an advisory group of advocates and stakeholders for the aging and disability community. And we discuss voting issues and also learn more from them about the barriers that voters may face within their communities. The Accessibility Advisory Committee in Wisconsin, it consists of 12 member organizations, and we meet with them several times a year to provide feedback to our staff on election administration issues, and also to develop partnerships things like training and public outreach. They've assisted us with on-site audits of polling places and providing staffing and experience for that as well. They also assist with agency efforts to certify voting systems and work on other special projects. So as we consider a new voting system for approval in the state of Wisconsin, one of the steps in our approval process is to engage our Accessibility Advisory Committee to help us make sure that that piece of equipment will meet the needs of all voters in our state as well. We've also turned to them throughout the pandemic to make sure that as we were considering new practices for polling places, for absentee voting, that we were remembering all of the things that may be important to voters in the disability community, and that those practices were incorporating their feedback as well. And so really, it's just an incredible partnership. We have great relationships, and they're really incorporated throughout our planning process at our agency to make sure that we're getting feedback during the planning stages of all of our projects.
Great to hear about. We'll go in reverse order this time, so I'll start with you, Megan. But thinking about both of these programs, or if you can talk a little bit about the impetus for getting this started, maybe some challenges that you might have faced in implementing the programs, or tips for someone else who's watching this and thinking about doing it in their state or jurisdiction.
Absolutely. So our Accessibility Advisory Committee was first organized over 10 years ago and has really been expanded over the last 10 years since its inception. And we've been able to include more diversity in our group in terms of stakeholders and representation. The goal of this group is really to ensure that we understand the challenges that voters in the aging and disability community face when voting, and that we can incorporate their knowledge that we gain through working with the accessibility program. So through, again, materials, web applications, whatever it might be, that we incorporate their feedback. Since election administration has been so publicly debated over the last few years, we really don't have any trouble with engaging community members to be a part of this committee. And so I think, the impetus was really just wanting to engage all voters and feedback from this important community as part of our planning process. And how could we do that in a sustainable way? So it wasn't just a group or a committee that we went with sort of on an impromptu basis that was really ingrained as part of our planning process as part of our agency. And what that's done is it's really allowed us to grow the program and to really make sure that we're incorporating that feedback in all the facets within our organization. And so, like you said on the outset, it's not an expensive or a difficult program to implement. It's really just creating relationships and then engaging people in the actual planning stages, be it voting equipment, being implementing other technology, or being it issuing guidance or other documents and making sure that you're including all voices of all types of voters to make sure that they're well served.
Great. Dean, how about you with setting up your program?
Yeah, I think it very much aligns with what Megan just spoke about, and congratulations, Megan, and Wisconsin. I don't think you can underscore enough the importance of that engagement with people in the community when you're talking about especially serving harder to reach populations in voting. That relationship with stakeholders and reaching out to people in the community is absolutely critical. And I would say that has been the impetus for the program here in Los Angeles County is hearing from our Language Accessibility Advisory Committee and our Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee about the challenges that voters have faced being able to vote independently and in a location that lives up to the significance of them casting their vote. And so it really was through those conversations and engaging those populations in the design of our voting experience that led to this. As far as challenges, I would say, I think as we've all seen in so many elements of elections administration over the years, I think the challenge preceding this was having the flexibility, both in terms of the regulatory authority and the structure of our state election laws, as well as the flexibility and agility of our voting systems to be able to accommodate this type of thing, the flex voting system, to be able to be in the community for a 10-day period, and for any voter to be able to come in and utilize those services, but still have the security and the integrity of making sure that a person can only vote once, and that they have a paper, tangible, auditable ballot. And so for us, that was part of a larger project of getting the infrastructure in place and the regulatory structure in place that would allow us to roll out a program like this.
Makes sense. And both of you mentioned the importance of feedback and engaging the community. Dean, can you talk about, I guess, the feedback that you've heard from voters and your election staff about the Flex Vote Center program?
Yeah, I mean, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, we served in the November election, we had 87 locations across that 10-day period. We served over 2,800 voters, and obviously they were pleased with that. In many cases, voters who otherwise would not have been able to vote in the election. I think probably the most meaningful feedback for me, and I think you experienced a little bit of this, Commissioner Hovland, when you were with us at the Cerebral Palsy Center of Los Angeles, which was one of the locations where we did this, but it was also a location where we had worked with the participants at that Cerebral Palsy Center in the actual design of our voting equipment and this program. And so some of the very people who had spoken to us about the challenges they had with voting, and the fact that they had been engaged, civically engaged and active voters their entire adult life, but had never voted a secret ballot before, and then being able to go back to them, have this Flex Vote Center, and step back and just watch them independently cast their ballot in a presidential election was just an incredible experience. And I think it speaks to the importance of and kind of the underlying philosophy of this program.
Great. And Megan, I think that, I mean, your partners nominated you all for this Clery. So I think that's certainly a level of feedback about how they feel about it. But I don't know if you have any other comments about either feedback you've received from staff or from voters about the impact of this.
You know, it really has been overwhelmingly positive from both our voters, from the members of our Accessibility Advisory Committee, and from our staff, because it creates opportunities for us to share information during the planning stage. I'm a huge proponent for having data-driven conversations and data-driven decisions, and this allows us to continually get that data from our partners to make sure that as we're planning that we're incorporating their feedback right away. I want to hear about it as we're planning the project, not after somebody's experienced an issue. And so I think by establishing this, it's really created some very positive things. For example, our public facing website, as the pandemic grew last year, that became more and more of an important tool for voters to be able to navigate the voting process, request their absentee, track their absentee. We had done a lot of work with the Accessibility Advisory Committee beforehand, and as we developed that website, to make sure that it was accessible and it was easily navigatable by everyone that might be using assistive technology. And so having that feedback on the forefront allowed us to serve our voters without having to work on break fixes or making things accessible in the middle of an actual crisis. And so we really appreciate their continued engagement because I think it creates a much more positive experience for voters when they actually go to the polls or are interacting with elections.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have any doubt that these are both programs that you all are going to continue in the future, but Megan, I'll start with you on this one. Were there things that you maybe learned this year, again, I mean, particularly with some of the challenges with the pandemic, that you look at as lessons learned or ways that you may continue to utilize this going forward? And I'll tie into that. I mean, we hit on tips for other jurisdictions, but again, sort of a lessons learned that you might take out of some of these experiences to share with colleagues around the country.
Yeah, I would say, absolutely that we plan to continue this program. And I hope that we continue to grow the program in terms of partner organizations that are representing a new viewpoint. I would hope that we'd be able to incorporate their feedback into even more program areas. So be it manuals, outreach, administrative rules, whatever it might be that we're working on, that we're incorporating their feedback in those processes as well. And in terms of tips for other jurisdictions, I would say, this is really something that I would encourage everybody to look into doing, because again, it's not expensive. It's not something that's difficult to do. It's really reaching out to advocacy groups in your community and creating relationships and really creating channels to bring more information and more knowledge into your office to be able to drive decisions. And I think people will be pleasantly surprised about how engaged these groups already are in election education and advocacy efforts. I think people should also, though, keep an open mind as you're engaging in these types of committees and feedback projects, because you're going to be offered constructive criticism. And I think you have to be ready to accept that feedback, accept that criticism, and use it to actually drive improvements. I think, we all need to, as election officials, set up our guidance, our technology, whatever it might be, to be dynamic and to be resilient as things change. And so creating these relationships is going to give you more feedback, but I think you also have to be postured to be able to utilize that feedback to actually improve the process as well.
Thank you for that. And Dean, I don't know if you have similar thoughts on again, sort of things ways you may adapt this program in the future, or ways that you would flag for colleagues around the country thinking about something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a program we're going to continue and also to expand. I think, a couple of things that maybe were somewhat unexpected for us, but in some respects, looking back, it makes sense. So, I mean, just as the name applies, a Flex Vote Center, the flexibility of it is really the value of it. And I mentioned at the beginning that our ability to adapt it to the conditions that we were in the 2020 election cycle became really important. And so I think a couple of things that stand out for us is that we have a partner program with this. It's our mobile vote centers they're a little more fixed and a little more scheduled, and they're typically that program was designed to go into places that were going to be heavily populated, where people in the community were already gathered, and allow them the opportunity to vote. Of course, under the pandemic conditions, we weren't seeing events like that in November, in the lead up to November. But what we were seeing is a surge and a need of our healthcare providers and our first responders who were working double shifts and extra hours at hospitals and health facilities. So we were able to adapt the program, same idea, but take it to the hospitals and use it in that respect. So I think that's a good example of the value of a program like this, is you can adapt it to the conditions that you're operating in. The other thing that I would say that stands out about this is that it also provides you with a contingency element. So while the program was designed to reach these populations we talked about, it also gave us the infrastructure and the trained staff on these Flex Vote Center teams that on election day, if we had a vote center or a polling location that had issues, or we needed surge capacity, we could actually send these teams out to pick up that additional work and to troubleshoot where we had issues on election day. So I think those are the big takeaways. I think very much like what Megan said, I think the real important thing about any of these programs is that you don't want to develop them in a vacuum. You really want to engage the people in the community that are being served. They know best what they need. They're going to be, if you build that dialogue, they're going to be very open and honest with you about those needs and about how they can partner with you on that. And this program in LA wouldn't have worked if we didn't have the partnerships of those facilities that applied and asked us to come in and work with us on scheduling and that type of thing. So I think that engagement, that level of engagement is absolutely critical.
Great. And again, both of these programs were recognized by our judges as being outstanding and deserving of a 2020 Cleary Award. And certainly, we've heard a lot about why in this conversation already. But if each of you, and Dean, I'll start with you here, if you could talk about, anything else we've missed that you would want to share, so your biggest takeaway from the program, that would be great, or what you've learned from this effort.
Sure. Well, again, just want to thank you and the EAC for the program. I even just in this dialogue, it's beneficial for me to hear about the experience in Wisconsin. It's validating to hear that this kind of conversation is going on throughout the country. I know from my interaction with colleagues around the country that the focus on accessibility and the kind of the creative and proactive approach that's being taken to serve voters with disabilities and voters who have been underserved in the past has been significant in this last election cycle, and I hope that we can continue to see that build. I think the pandemic and running an election in the pandemic really pushed us to have to look at these types of programs through a different lens and to recognize that we do need to be adaptive to conditions, and that's what's going to keep our electoral process strong going forward. So I think that's really the takeaway here, is that you gotta serve voters where they're going to be and where their needs and meet their needs where they're at, but also be adaptable to the conditions that whatever they may be, because elections need to go on. We need to continue to move forward and make sure that we can conduct fair and transparent elections.
Absolutely. Megan, thoughts, big lessons learned, anything we missed? I would love to hear it.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. And I think Dean said it really well. Engaging with stakeholders is going to make your programs more effective. I think there's just no doubt about it. And the thing that makes me so proud about this particular award is that we were nominated by members of our advisory committee. We actually didn't even know until we won that we were up for consideration. And so I think that just speaks to the partnership that we formed. I'm so grateful to the members of the committee for the time that they've dedicated to this. They really take time out of their day, out of their other efforts, in order to advise us through various programs. And in 2020, that advisement was so incredibly important as our commission and local election officials were making decisions. To have their wisdom and knowledge to guide those decisions was just so incredible. So I'm just so grateful that we have a community that's willing to engage with us on these questions and able to dedicate their time to us. I think about things like voting in care facilities in 2020 and how we were able to reach those facilities and give them more information about the mechanics of how that would work, about some of the barriers that people might face, because we had these existing relationships and avenues to be able to share information. And so I'm just really glad that we started to lay this groundwork 10 years ago, and that it's grown into such a robust partnership that we're at a place where we'd actually be nominated by some of our partners for an award like this. So we're really humbled and honored by this. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss the program today.
Absolutely. And again, thank you all for the work that you do. As you know, the Help America Vote Act that created the EAC, a central portion of that was accessibility, ensuring that all Americans are able to vote independently and privately. And so, just really appreciate the work that you're doing, our ability to recognize it in whatever way we can, and appreciate you taking the time to share that around the country. And the work that you're doing to share your voter or to support your voters and help them participate in the process, and hopefully your colleagues around the country will watch this and take away some good ideas. And so again, we appreciate you being here today. Congratulations again on your Cleary Awards, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.